"I love someone else," said the millionaire CEO. 3 years later, he saw her with triplets. What happened next? Watch till the end, a very powerful story. But before proceeding, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, "I love Mr. Peter." Let's start with love. Some moments divide your life into before and after, and Hayley Matthews was living in the last seconds of her before without knowing it. She stood in the penthouse office that overlooked the city, holding the pregnancy test results behind her back like a secret surprise. Like a gift she'd been waiting weeks to unwrap. The paper felt smooth against her trembling fingers, and she'd read the words so many times they were burned into her memory. 3 heartbeats, 3 babies growing inside her, 3 tiny miracles that would change everything. The doctor had shown her the ultrasound screen, 3 flickering lights in the darkness, and Hayley had cried right there in the examination room, overwhelmed by joy so pure it hurt. The afternoon sun poured through the windows, catching the simple gold wedding band on her finger, the one she'd chosen because she never needed diamonds to prove his love. Their wedding day had been small and perfect, just the 2 of them and a handful of friends, because Hayley believed marriage was about partnership, not performance. Josh had promised her the world that day, and she'd promised him only her heart, thinking that would be enough. She'd been his wife for 4 years, and they'd been good years despite the struggles. When Josh's company nearly collapsed in that first year, when investors walked away and creditors came calling, Hayley had been the one who stayed up with him through endless nights, reviewing numbers she barely understood, making coffee at 3 in the morning, telling him he could rebuild because she believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. She'd watched him claw his way back from nothing, celebrated every small victory, held him through every setback. The blue dress she wore was his favorite. The one, he always said, made her eyes sparkle like midnight, had been crushed into diamonds. She'd made his favorite dinner, set candles on the table, practiced the words she'd say. "We're having a baby." Felt too small for 3 babies. So she'd settled on, "Our family is growing in ways we never imagined," which felt more adequate for the magnitude of the news. The office door opened, and Josh walked in. Hayley's prepared speech died in her throat. His face was stone, carved from something cold and unfamiliar. His eyes, which used to light up when he saw her, slid past her like she was furniture. He walked to the bar, poured himself whiskey even though it was barely afternoon, and drank it in one swallow. "Josh?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Is everything all right?" He poured another drink, set the glass down, turned to face her, and there was nothing in his expression that looked like the man she'd married. "I love someone else, Hayley." 5 words. That's all it took to detonate a life. The pregnancy results slipped from her numb fingers, falling to the floor between them. But Josh didn't notice. He was already talking, his voice steady and clinical, like he was presenting information at a board meeting rather than destroying a marriage. "Her name is Veronica Ashford. I met her at the charity gala 6 months ago. She understands my world in ways you never could, Hayley. She comes from old money, real money, the kind of connections that can take me places I need to go. Her family controls real estate empires across 3 states. Her uncle sits on the board of directors for 5 Fortune 500 companies. Her connections could transform everything I've built into something that actually matters in the circles that count. This isn't about love anymore. It's about strategic positioning for the future I deserve." Hayley stood frozen, trying to process words that reduced their entire marriage to a business calculation. "Strategic positioning? That's what I am to you? What our marriage is?" "And it was," Josh corrected with brutal precision, and the past tense hit harder than anything else. "What our marriage was? You're a good person, Hayley, but good isn't enough in the world I'm entering. I need someone who already belongs there, who can open doors without having to learn the rules first. Veronica's father alone is worth more than my entire company. Her family name carries weight that money can't buy. This isn't personal. It's practical survival at the highest levels. I've already spoken to lawyers. We can do this cleanly. You'll be taken care of financially, obviously. I'm not a monster. Haley looked at this man, this stranger wearing her husband's face, and something inside her went quiet and cold. She thought about telling him. The words were right there, burning on her tongue. I'm pregnant. We're having triplets. You're throwing away 3 children you don't even know exist. Your legacy isn't going to be built through Veronica's connections, but through the children growing inside me right now. But looking at his face, at the cold calculation in his eyes, at the way he'd already decided she wasn't worth enough for his ambitions, she realized with devastating clarity the worst possible thing she could do was trap him with obligation. This man who measured everything by strategic value would see these babies as anchors dragging him down, complications interfering with his carefully calculated ascent. He would resent her for using pregnancy as leverage. He would resent the children for existing at the wrong time in his master plan. This man didn't love her. Maybe he never had. Maybe she'd been a temporary placeholder until someone more suitable came along. And she wouldn't use innocent babies to force him to stay. Wouldn't watch him grow to hate both her and them for disrupting his strategic marriage. Wouldn't raise children in a home where their mother's worth was constantly questioned and their existence was treated as an inconvenience to be managed. Better they never know him at all than know a father who wished they didn't exist. When? She asked quietly. Josh looked confused. When what? When do you want me gone? Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief that she wasn't going to make this difficult. There's no rush. Take your time packing, find a place. We'll work out the details. I don't need time. Haley walked past him, each step feeling distant and dreamlike. I don't need your money either. I don't need anything from you. Haley, be reasonable. You can't what? She turned in the doorway, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised her. Can't leave quietly? Can't make this easy for you? You're right, Josh. This isn't personal. So there's nothing personal to discuss. She walked to their bedroom, the one they'd shared for 4 years, where he'd held her through nightmares and made love to her on lazy Sunday mornings and promised her forever. She pulled out a single suitcase and packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, the photograph of her grandmother, the one person who'd loved her unconditionally, the leather journal her mother had given her before she died. Nothing expensive, nothing that belonged to Josh's world. She could hear him on the phone in the other room, his voice drifting through the walls. Yes, she's taking it well. Better than expected, honestly. No, there won't be any drama. She's always been reasonable. Reasonable. Is that what she'd been? Reasonable when she gave up her own dreams to support his? Reasonable when she made herself smaller so he could feel bigger? Reasonable when she loved him with everything she had while he calculated her worth and found her lacking? Haley closed the suitcase and walked out of the bedroom. Josh was still on the phone, probably with his lawyers or with Veronica, planning his strategic future. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't leave a note. She simply walked out the door and pulled it closed behind her with a quiet click that felt like the sound of her old life ending. The elevator ride down felt endless. She watched the numbers descend, each floor another layer of distance between her and the man who'd chosen status over her, money over love, connections over commitment. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, to the 3 lives growing there. The 3 children who would never know their father because he'd shown her exactly who he was. By the time Haley reached the lobby, she'd made her decision. She would disappear, completely. She would take the trust fund her grandmother had left her, the $8 million she'd never told Josh about because she never wanted him to think money mattered between them, and she would build a life somewhere he'd never think to look. She would raise these children alone, protect them from a man who thought love could be measured in strategic advantages and business opportunities. The doorman called her a taxi, and Haley gave him an address across town, a hotel where she could stay while she figured out her next move. As the taxi pulled away from the building, she looked back one last time at the penthouse where her husband was probably already celebrating his freedom. where he was planning his future with someone who understood his world better than she ever could. What Josh didn't know, what he would never know, was that Hayley Matthews understood more than he thought. She understood that some prices are too high to pay, that some compromises cost you your soul, that being chosen second is worse than not being chosen at all. She understood that her children deserved better than a father who would calculate their worth, better than a man who thought people were assets to be leveraged. The taxi merged into traffic, carrying Hayley toward an uncertain future, and she placed both hands over her stomach, over the 3 heartbeats that were hers alone now. "We'll be okay," she whispered to them, to herself, to the ghost of the woman she'd been an hour ago. "We don't need him. We never did." But even as she said the words, tears began falling, silent and relentless, because knowing you're better off without someone doesn't stop you from grieving the person you thought they were. Chapter 2. The Empire of Ashes. The wedding announcement appeared in every major society magazine exactly 3 months after Hayley vanished, and Josh Brooke stood in the center of a ballroom that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month, smiling for photographers who captured him next to his beautiful new wife. Veronica Ashford had transformed into Veronica Brooke in a ceremony that was everything Josh had once scorned as pretentious excess. Ice sculptures that melted slowly under expensive lighting, $1,000 flower arrangements that would wilt and die before the night ended, a 7-tier cake that tasted like designer cardboard wrapped in fondant, guest lists that read like a directory of wealth and influence, people Josh barely knew but desperately wanted to impress. Veronica had orchestrated every detail with military precision, ensuring that their wedding became the social event of the season, the kind of spectacle that announced to everyone who mattered that Josh Brooke had finally arrived in their world. The congratulations poured in from people Josh barely knew, connections Veronica's family had cultivated over generations of careful social climbing and strategic marriages. Investors who'd previously ignored his calls now sought him out at the reception, eager to discuss opportunities they'd never mentioned before. Business opportunities materialized like magic, all because he was married to the right woman, the strategic woman, the woman who belonged to their world in ways Hayley never could have. Josh told himself he'd made the right choice every time he saw his company's stock prices climb steadily after the wedding announcement. The numbers didn't lie. His decision had been sound, practical, exactly what he needed to elevate himself to the next level of success and influence, but practical had a price that kept rising in ways Josh hadn't anticipated. Veronica moved into the penthouse the week after their honeymoon in the Maldives, and the first thing she did was hire an expensive team of interior decorators. Josh came home one evening to find furniture being carried out by efficient movers, pieces Hayley had chosen carefully over years, things that had made the space feel like a home rather than a showroom. The decorators replaced everything with cold designer pieces that looked expensive but felt like living in a museum, all sharp edges and uncomfortable beauty that was meant to be admired rather than lived with. The old furniture was so pedestrian, Veronica explained, running her perfectly manicured fingers along a glass table that cost more than a decent car. "We need to project success, darling. People judge you by your surroundings, and we can't have them thinking you can't afford the best." Josh wanted to argue that the old couch had been comfortable, that Hayley had found it at an estate sale and loved how it faced the window so they could watch sunsets together, that furniture was supposed to be used and enjoyed rather than just displayed. But those memories felt inappropriate to voice to his new wife, so he swallowed them along with his objections and wrote another check to cover the renovations. The parties started immediately and never seemed to end. Veronica needed to establish herself as a hostess, she explained repeatedly, needed to create the right social environment for networking and making the connections that would benefit Josh's company. Every weekend, the penthouse filled with strangers drinking Josh's expensive champagne, eating elaborately prepared food from caterers who charged more per plate than some people spent on groceries for a week. Laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny, Veronica moved through these gatherings like a queen holding court, introducing Josh to people whose names he immediately forgot, people who smiled at him warmly while their eyes calculated his net worth and potential usefulness. "This is what success looks like," Veronica would whisper to him between greeting guests, her perfectly lipstick smile never wavering. "This is what we need to do to maintain the image and keep building the right relationships." Josh started noticing the bills piling up on his desk with increasing frequency. Veronica's shopping was constant and excessive, a never-ending stream of packages arriving daily, new designer wardrobe for every season and social event, different luxury cars for different occasions and moods, jewelry that sparkled beautifully at parties and cost obscenely. When Josh gently suggested she might want to moderate the spending just slightly, Veronica's smile turned sharp and dangerous. "I thought you wanted someone who understood your world, Josh. Someone who belonged to the circles you're trying to break into. This is what that world costs. My friends would notice immediately if I wore the same dress twice to events. They'd talk. They'd wonder, is that what you want? For people to think you can't afford to keep your wife happy and well-dressed?" So Josh worked longer hours than ever before, took on projects he would have declined in the past, pushed his employees harder to meet increasingly tight deadlines that would generate the revenue needed to fund Veronica's lifestyle. The penthouse that used to be a refuge, a place where he could relax and be himself, became a place he dreaded returning to, always wondering what new expense would be waiting, what new demand Veronica would present as absolute necessity. Her father's promised business connections did materialize, but they came with strings Josh hadn't fully anticipated or understood. Investments that somehow benefited Veronica's family more than his own company. Board positions that diluted Josh's control over his own business. Expectations that he'd fund failing ventures because family helps family, and wasn't he family now? Josh found himself trapped in a web of obligations that looked like opportunities on the surface, but felt like quicksand beneath. Each one pulling him deeper into debt and commitment he couldn't escape, without destroying the very connections he'd married Veronica to obtain. In quiet moments, usually around 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come and Veronica was passed out beside him, smelling of expensive perfume and too much wine, Josh thought about Haley. He'd tried to find her in those first months after she left, had hired private investigators who came back with absolutely nothing, as if she'd simply dissolved into air and ceased to exist. No forwarding address, no contact information with friends or former colleagues, no trace of where she'd gone or what she was doing or whether she was even okay. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit, this loose end that wouldn't tie itself up neatly. This question mark in his otherwise organized life. Sometimes he wondered if she was okay, if she'd found someone else who appreciated her in ways he clearly hadn't, if she ever thought about him or their marriage or what they'd had before he destroyed it. He'd wake from dreams where Haley was trying to tell him something desperately important, her mouth moving urgently, but no sound coming out no matter how hard he tried to hear her. And he'd reach for his phone before remembering he had no way to contact her, and she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. But then Veronica would wake up demanding he order breakfast from that specific cafe 40 minutes across town, because nowhere else made their pastries the way she liked, or needing him to cancel important meetings so he could attend some society function where she wanted to be seen with him. And thoughts of Haley would disappear under the weight of immediate demands and obligations. The breaking point came on an evening that started like any other. Nothing special about the day, except that Josh had managed to come home early for once, exhausted from negotiating a difficult contract that would barely cover the month's expenses between Veronica's spending and her father's investment demands. He walked into the penthouse quietly, planning to surprise Veronica, Maybe suggest they order simple takeout and spend an evening without the performance and pretense that defined their marriage. He heard her voice drifting from the bedroom, laughing in a way she never laughed with him, light and genuine and cruel. The door was slightly open, and Josh stood frozen in the hallway, listening to his wife talk on the phone with someone she clearly felt comfortable with in ways she'd never been comfortable with him. "Oh, Trevor, you should see the ridiculous gift he just bought me. A diamond bracelet that probably cost more than his first car. The idiot actually thinks I care about him beyond his bank account." Her laugh was mocking, sharp with contempt. "Of course I'm counting down to the divorce settlement. Another year, maybe 2 at most, and I'll have enough to never work a day again in my life. You should see how easy he is to manipulate. Just pout a little, mention what my friends have or what I saw someone wearing, and he'll write a check for absolutely anything, without question." Josh stood completely frozen, every word landing like physical blows to his chest, making it hard to breathe. He's so desperate to belong, Trevor. So pathetically grateful that someone from a real family would even look at him twice, much less marry him. He actually thinks our connections are about him being special or worthy, not about him being useful and disposable. My father is bleeding his company dry through those investment deals, and the fool thinks it's networking and opportunity. Another cruel laugh. The best part? He threw away some pathetic little wife for me. Can you imagine? He actually thought I was an upgrade. Men are so incredibly stupid when their egos get involved. Josh's hands were shaking badly. He wanted to storm into the room, confront her, rage at her for the betrayal and the lies and the complete contempt, but something stopped him. Some survival instinct that said confrontation would only make this worse, that she'd twist it somehow and make him the villain. Instead, he turned around and walked out of the penthouse as quietly as he'd entered, his whole world crumbling with every step. He sat in his car in the parking garage for over 2 hours, processing what he'd heard, unable to drive because his hands were shaking too badly to trust himself behind the wheel. Every moment of his marriage to Veronica replayed through this new lens of understanding. And Josh saw with painful clarity how blind he'd been, how easily manipulated, how perfectly she'd played him from the very beginning. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, devastating as that was. The worst part was that he'd asked for this. He'd chosen strategy over authenticity, calculation over genuine connection, and gotten exactly what he deserved. When Josh finally pulled himself together enough to function, he did what he should have done months earlier. He contacted the best divorce attorney in the state, explained the situation without emotion because he had none left, and began the long process of extracting himself from the disaster he'd created. The divorce took 8 brutal months and cost Josh $7 million. Money he'd worked himself into the ground to earn. Money that disappeared into Veronica's accounts as payment for a marriage that had been nothing but a transaction from the very first moment. The legal proceedings were brutal and public, with every humiliating detail splashed across business publications and gossip columns that treated his pain as entertainment. Josh Brooke, the self-made millionaire who'd been conned by a gold digger. Josh Brooke, who'd thrown away a stable marriage for social climbing. Josh Brooke, the cautionary tale everyone could feel superior to. On the day the divorce was finalized, Josh sat alone in the penthouse that felt cavernous and empty without even Veronica's cold presence to fill it. The designer furniture she'd chosen still filled the rooms like monuments to his stupidity and poor judgment. He poured himself expensive whiskey and thought about the chain of decisions that had led him to this moment. Alone and broke and humiliated. He'd had something real with Haley. She'd loved him when he had nothing, supported him through failures that would have sent other people running, never asked for anything except his time and attention. She'd been exactly what he needed, and he'd thrown her away because she didn't come with the right connections, didn't project the right image, didn't belong to the world he was desperately trying to break into. And what had that world given him? Debt, humiliation, the bitter knowledge that he'd been used as thoroughly as he'd used Haley. Late at night, Josh would lie awake and wonder if Haley was happy wherever she was. He hoped she'd found someone who saw her value immediately, who didn't need to lose everything to understand what mattered. The ghost of Haley's face haunted every empty room. Chapter 3. The Architect of Herself. The cottage appeared through morning fog, like something from a dream. Weathered shingles and a garden gone wild, sitting on a cliff that overlooked the endless ocean. Haley stood on the porch with her suitcase at her feet, and her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant with 3 lives she would protect with everything she had left in her. The elderly woman who answered her tentative knock had silver hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see straight through all pretense into the truth beneath. She studied Haley's pale face, her obvious pregnancy, the single suitcase that contained everything she owned now, and something shifted in her weathered expression. "You're here about the rental," she said, and it wasn't a question. Haley nodded because words felt too difficult, emotions too complicated to express coherently. The woman studied her for another long moment. "I'm Rosalind. The cottage is yours for half what I'm asking other people. First month completely free. No questions about what brought you here or who you might be running from." Haley's throat tightened painfully around words she couldn't quite form. "I can pay full price. I have money. I'm sure you do, child. But you don't need to prove anything to me right now. You need a safe place to heal whatever broke you badly enough to bring you here alone and pregnant. The cottage provides that, or it provides nothing worth having." So Haley moved into the cottage that smelled like salt air and old wood and decades of other people's stories, into rooms that felt like embrace rather than judgment. She spent those last 2 months of pregnancy walking the beach every day, feeling 3 lives kick and roll inside her with increasing vigor, talking to them about the world they'd soon enter and the mother she was determined to become, despite having no real model for how to do this completely alone. The local doctor, a practical woman named Eleanor, who delivered half the town's babies over her 4 decades of dedicated practice, examined Haley with gentle efficiency and raised both eyebrows significantly at the ultrasound screen showing 3 distinct heartbeats. "Triplets. Well now, you're certainly going to have your hands quite full there, Mama. You got family coming to help you through this challenging time." "No family," Haley said quietly, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "Just us 4 now." The doctor nodded like she'd heard various iterations of this particular story many times before in her long career. Wrote down her personal cell phone number at the bottom of the appointment card without Haley having to ask. "You call me absolutely any time, day or night, doesn't matter what hour. Nobody brings 3 babies into this world truly alone, if I have anything whatsoever to say about it, which I do." But alone was exactly what Haley was, in every way that truly mattered. And she learned slowly and sometimes painfully to find unexpected strength in that enforced solitude rather than just drowning in fear of it. Labor started on a Tuesday morning when the sky couldn't quite decide between threatening storm and offering sunshine, the clouds heavy and uncertain. Rosalind drove her to the small regional hospital with steady, confident hands and calm, reassuring words that helped more than Haley could express. Stayed through 18 brutal hours of bringing 3 separate humans into existence, while their biological father was 3,000 miles away planning his strategic future with someone deemed more suitable. The first baby emerged, screaming absolute defiance at the world. A tiny daughter with dark eyes, identical to Josh's, that made Haley's heart stop for several seconds. The exhausted nurse placed her carefully on Haley's chest, and something fundamental shifted in her understanding of what love actually meant. This minuscule human existed because Haley had survived Josh's betrayal, had chosen life over despair, had refused to let his abandonment destroy her, 2 more babies followed over the next hour, another daughter and 1 son, each absolutely perfect and utterly terrifying in their complete dependence on her. She named them with tremendous care. Aurelia for the first daughter, meaning golden, because she came into the world fierce and determined. Dashiell for the son, meaning page boy, because he was gentle from his very first breath. Isolde for the second daughter, meaning ice battle, because her eyes seemed to examine the world with ancient wisdom. She kept Josh's surname deliberately and defiantly. They were Aurelia Brooke, Dashiell Brooke, and Isolde Brooke, because whatever Josh had done to Hayley, these children deserved to know their origins without shame. The first year was nothing but survival. Hayley existed in perpetual exhausted fog, nursing and changing and soothing 3 babies whose sleep schedules seemed designed by forces of chaos to prevent her from ever resting. Rosalind appeared at the cottage daily with prepared food and helping hands, never prying, never demanding explanations, but somewhere in that exhausted haze, Hayley discovered something unexpected about herself. She was genuinely brilliant at building things from nothing. The abandoned bookstore on Main Street had sat closed for 2 years after the elderly owner passed away. Hayley bought it with cash, shocked the realtor, and spent 6 months transforming dusty emptiness into something magical. She kept the old wooden shelves, but added comfortable reading nooks, installed a cafe in the back with equipment that made proper espresso, created an event space for author readings and community gatherings. The bookstore opened when the triplets were 18 months old and became the town's heart within weeks. Hayley hired local teenagers, paid them well, taught them about creating spaces where people felt valued. The money from the bookstore was modest, but Hayley wasn't finished. She noticed beachfront properties sitting vacant, bought 3 with her grandmother's trust fund, renovated them into retreats rather than tourist traps. She started a small publishing company when a local writer asked for help. By the time the triplets turned 3, Hayley had transformed 8 million into 15 million through smart decisions and clarity that came from having nothing to lose. The triplets grew extraordinary. Aurelia became their fierce protector, standing between her siblings and any threat. Dashiell developed gentle curiosity about everything. Isolde sang constantly, making up songs about adventures. Hayley built traditions. Beach birthday parties with treasure hunts. Sunday pancakes, where each child requested their own shape. Bedtime stories about brave queens who didn't need rescuing. She dated occasionally. Good men who respected that 3 children would always be her priority. Hayley was happy in ways she'd never been in Josh's world. She loved her cottage with creaky floors and ocean views. She loved knowing every customer by name. She loved watching her children grow without their father's ambitions crushing their spirits. Sometimes late at night, she thought about Josh, wondered if his strategic marriage brought success. She'd forgiven him in the way that comes from understanding his betrayal had set her free. But forgiveness didn't mean she wanted him back or trusted him near the children they'd created. Josh had made his choice, and Hayley had built a life around the consequences. She never imagined he'd find her. The world felt big enough that 2 people could stay lost forever. But the universe was preparing something catastrophic, and fate was about to walk Josh Brooke into the cafe where Hayley sat every Saturday morning with 3 children who had his eyes. Chapter 4. The Shattering. Saturday morning started as perfectly ordinary as any other, which should have been Hayley's first warning that the universe was preparing to shatter everything she'd built. The bookstore cafe hummed with comfortable weekend energy, the familiar soundtrack of espresso machines hissing, conversations flowing, pages turning. Hayley sat by the large window overlooking Main Street, morning sunlight warming her face, watching her 3 children debate dragon ice cream preferences with the intense seriousness that only 6-year-olds could achieve. Dragons would obviously prefer chocolate, Dashiell insisted with scientific certainty, his small face completely earnest. Because chocolate is dark like their caves and rich like treasure hoards they guard. Dragons are lactose intolerant. Aurelia countered with the absolute certainty of someone who had decided something was irrefutable fact. They're reptiles. Reptiles can't process dairy products. It's basic biology. You completely made that up just now, Dashiell protested. Did not. I read it in a book about dragons and science. Which specific book exactly? A book about dragon biology and digestive systems. You wouldn't understand it anyway because it's advanced, Isolde, completely unconcerned with the scientific accuracy of dragon dietary restrictions, was drawing an elaborate picture of a dragon eating an enormous ice cream sundae, complete with rainbow sprinkles, chocolate sauce drizzled artistically, and a bright red cherry perched on top. She hummed while she colored, making up a cheerful song about dragons who loved dessert more than treasure. Hayley sipped her coffee slowly, her heart absolutely full of this perfect, ordinary moment. The cafe buzzed pleasantly around them with weekend regulars, tourists browsing the carefully curated shelves, the comforting rhythm of a life she'd built from nothing. She felt safe here, settled, like she'd finally found the place where she belonged after years of searching. She didn't see him enter, didn't feel the precise moment when everything changed forever. Josh Brooke walked through the door, carrying the crushing weight of 3 years of mistakes and a lifetime of regrets. And his eyes found her immediately like a magnet finding true north. Like fate had guided him directly to this moment, Hayley felt his intense gaze before she actually saw him. That strange, primitive instinct that screams danger when predators are near. She looked up from her coffee, and time stopped completely. The world narrowing to just this moment, this impossible collision of past and present. He looked dramatically different from the man she'd left. Thinner, almost gaunt, tired in ways that went deeper than simple exhaustion. The expensive power suits replaced with ordinary jeans and a plain button-down shirt that didn't scream wealth or status. But his eyes were exactly the same, those distinctive dark eyes her children had inherited, and they were staring at her like she was a ghost he'd given up believing in years ago. Then his eyes moved deliberately to the children sitting around her, and Hayley watched understanding detonate across his face like a bomb. Aurelia, with her fierce, protective expression and her dark eyes that mirrored his own. Dashiell, with his gentle curiosity, and the way he tilted his head exactly like Josh did when thinking deeply. Isolde, with her artistic concentration and those unmistakable features. 3 children who looked exactly like a perfect combination of their parents, undeniable in their parentage. Impossible to mistake for anyone else's offspring. The coffee cup slipped from Josh's suddenly nerveless hand. Ceramics shattered loudly on the tile floor like a gunshot echoing through the space. And in the sudden, shocked silence that followed, every single head in the busy cafe turned toward the sound, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Hayley's body moved before her conscious mind fully caught up with the dangerous situation unfolding. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly, placing herself physically between Josh and her children with the pure protective instinct of a mother defending her vulnerable young from threat. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs, adrenaline flooding through every nerve ending, making her hands shake slightly. The children noticed immediately that something was very wrong. Aurelia's hand shot out lightning fast to grab her siblings, pulling them close with protective fierceness that made Hayley's heart break and swell with pride simultaneously. Dashiell's eyes went wide with confusion and concern. Isolde stopped humming mid-note, her crayon freezing in mid-stroke, her small face troubled. "Mommy!" Aurelia's voice was small, but remarkably steady, despite the tension she could clearly sense. "Who is that man? Why is he staring at us like that?" Hayley couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't process that Josh was actually here, physically present in her bookstore, in her carefully constructed safe town, in the life she'd built so carefully without him over 3 difficult years. Josh's face had gone paper white, all color draining as if someone had pulled a plug. He stared at the children with the expression of someone watching their past and present collide catastrophically into something completely incomprehensible. Haley could see calculations happening frantically behind his eyes. Mathematical gymnastics, counting back years, adding up the timeline with growing horror, understanding exactly when she must have gotten pregnant based on how old these children appeared to be. Haley. Her name came out broken and desperate, barely more than a whisper. Are they? We're leaving. Haley's voice cut through his question like a sharp blade, cold and absolute. She turned to her children, forcing her face into something that wouldn't terrify them completely. Aurelia, Dashiell, Isolde, pack up your things right now. We're going home immediately. But, Mummy, I haven't finished my dragon drawing. Now, baby. Right this second. No arguments. The urgency and fear in Haley's normally calm voice made the children move without further protest or questions. Aurelia gathered crayons with quick military efficiency. Dashiell carefully folded his sister's unfinished drawing with gentle hands. Isolde clutched her stuffed rabbit like it was a security blanket that could protect her from whatever was making her mother so scared. Josh found his voice somehow, took a stumbling step forward with his hand outstretched. Wait, please wait. I need to understand. Stay away from us. The words came out cold and absolutely final, leaving no room for negotiation. Don't come near us. Don't talk to us. Don't even look at us. Stay back. She shepherded the children quickly toward the back door, the staff entrance that led to the alley where her car was safely parked away from public view. Aurelia looked back over her shoulder at Josh with suspicious, protective eyes, her small face fierce with determination to guard her family. Dashiell pressed close to Haley's leg, seeking comfort and safety. Isolde started crying quietly, picking up on her mother's fear and confusion. Josh stood frozen in the center of the cafe like a statue, broken cups scattered at his feet, staring at the space where his children had just disappeared. His children. 3 of them. Triplets he never knew existed because their mother had chosen to hide them from him completely. The cafe had gone absolutely silent, everyone watching this dramatic scene unfold like they were witnessing something momentous. Rosalind appeared with a broom and dustpan, her weathered face showing no sympathy whatsoever as she surveyed the broken man standing amid broken ceramic. She began sweeping up the shattered pieces with deliberate slowness. "You're Josh Brooke," she said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "The man who broke that woman badly enough that she ran 3,000 miles while pregnant with those babies." Josh couldn't deny it. Couldn't defend himself, couldn't find any words that would make this better. He just stood there drowning in the crushing weight of realization. "Those children are 3 years old," Rosalind continued in that same quiet, devastating tone. "Which means Haley was 7 months pregnant when you told her you loved someone else. She walked out of your life carrying 3 babies. And you never once wondered why she left so suddenly and completely, without explanation." "I didn't know," Josh managed to whisper, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. "No, you didn't know, because you didn't ask, didn't notice, didn't care enough to wonder if there might be a very good reason your wife disappeared without a single trace." Rosalind's expression hardened into something like contempt. "How do you know about all this?" "Haley never told me your name specifically, never said a single bad word about you to anyone in this entire town. But I'm not blind, and I can read newspapers. Your very public, very expensive divorce from that gold-digger woman was plastered across every business publication 6 months ago. I recognized your face from all those photos." Rosalind paused in her sweeping. "So here's what you're going to do, Josh Brooke. You're going to leave this cafe, leave this town, and leave Haley and those innocent children alone. You made your choice 3 years ago when you threw her away. You don't get to disrupt their peace now." "They're my children," Josh said, and his voice broke on the words. "Biology doesn't make you a father," Rosalind said sharply. "Those children have a mother who loves them more than her own life. who built an entire empire to provide for them, who teaches them every single day that their worth isn't dependent on what they can do for someone else or how useful they are. They don't need you. They don't even know you exist in their world. Josh wanted to argue, wanted to demand his rights, wanted to rage at the unfairness of discovering he had children in the same moment he learned he'd lost them forever. But looking at Rosalind's implacable face, at the judgment in every customer's eyes as they stared at him, at the way the entire cafe had turned hostile in seconds, he understood that nothing he could say would matter to any of them. He walked out into bright sunshine that felt completely wrong, given how dark everything had just become. He stood on the sidewalk outside the bookstore, trying desperately to process what had just happened, trying to figure out his next move in a situation that felt utterly impossible. Those children were his. Had his eyes, his features, undeniable biological proof. Haley had kept them from him for 3 entire years, raised them alone, never told him they existed. Anger wanted to rise up and give him something to hold on to besides this crushing sense of loss, but underneath the anger was something much worse, understanding. Haley had been 7 months pregnant when he told her he loved someone else. She'd probably been about to tell him the wonderful news when he destroyed their marriage with 5 terrible words. She'd probably practiced what she was going to say, imagined his reaction, hoped he'd be happy. And instead of using the pregnancy to trap him or manipulate him into staying, she'd left quietly and completely, protecting her unborn children from a father who'd proven beyond doubt that he couldn't value people over opportunities and status. Josh pulled out his phone with shaking hands and searched for H. Matthews, the mysterious investor he'd come to this town specifically to meet about a potential property deal. Articles popped up showing a successful entrepreneur who'd transformed the coastal town's economy. But photos were always taken from distances or angles that obscured the face. He'd come here to do business with Haley without even knowing it. The universe had just delivered the cruelest joke imaginable. Josh sat down heavily on a bench outside the bookstore and put his head in his hands. 3 children, triplets, his children, growing up without him, thriving without him, not needing him at all, because their mother had given them everything they needed. He'd missed 3 years of their lives completely. First steps, first words, birthdays, bedtime stories, all of it gone forever. And he would miss every year after this, unless he somehow figured out how to fix this seemingly impossible situation. Rosalind came outside, arms crossed over her chest, looking down at him with no pity. "You're still sitting here." "I don't know where else to be," Josh admitted honestly. "That woman built something absolutely remarkable here," Rosalind said. "Started with nothing but heartbreak and determination. She owns half the commercial property on Main Street now. And she accomplished all of that while raising 3 babies completely alone, without any help from you." Josh understood. He was being dismissed, warned off, told in no uncertain terms to leave. But he couldn't, not now. Not knowing his children existed somewhere in this town. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly but firmly. "I know I don't have any rights. I know I don't deserve anything from her or them. But those are my children, and I need to find a way to be part of their lives somehow." Rosalind studied him for a long, measuring moment. "Then you better get yourself a very good lawyer, Josh Brooke, because that woman is not the same person you left behind 3 years ago. She's stronger, smarter, and absolutely done with men who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. You want to fight her for those children? You'll lose everything you have left." She walked back inside, leaving Josh alone on the bench with the ruins of his life scattered around him and the impossible task of figuring out how to earn back something he'd thrown away before he even knew it was precious beyond measure. 5. The War Declaration. The email arrived at dawn with the force and fury of a declaration of war, and Haley read it exactly 3 times with increasing disbelief before her hands started shaking so badly she had to set down her coffee cup to avoid spilling it everywhere. legal letterhead from a prestigious downtown firm she didn't recognize. Attorney representing Joshua Brooke in matters pertaining to the paternity and custody of minor children, Aurelia Brooke, Dashiell Brooke, and Isolde Brooke, demanding immediate DNA testing to establish biological parentage beyond any possible shadow of doubt, requesting emergency temporary custody, pending full comprehensive investigation into why the mother had deliberately and maliciously concealed the existence of said children from their biological father for 3 years, threatening extensive legal action for parental alienation, claiming damages of $10 million for lost time with his children, and demanding Haley appear in court within 30 days to answer for her unconscionable actions or risk losing custody entirely. The words blurred as Haley read them again. $10 million, emergency custody, parental alienation. Each phrase was a weapon designed to destroy everything she'd built, to paint her as a villain who'd stolen his children, rather than a mother who'd protected them from a man who'd thrown her away like garbage. Haley stood frozen in her kitchen with cold coffee growing colder in the forgotten cup, watching her carefully constructed world begin cracking down the middle like fragile glass under too much pressure. She'd known this was coming from the precise moment Josh saw the children yesterday in the cafe, had spent an entirely sleepless night preparing herself mentally for the battle ahead. But preparation didn't make the brutal reality any less devastating or terrifying. The children were still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that their entire stable lives were about to be turned into a vicious battlefield where adults fought over them like territory to be conquered. Haley had spent countless hours last night sitting beside their beds, watching them sleep peacefully, memorizing their peaceful, innocent faces, trying desperately to figure out how to protect them from the storm that was coming like a freight train. She called her regular attorney at 7 in the morning, knowing she was waking him early but not caring. He read the threatening email with growing concern, made genuinely sympathetic noises about the difficult situation, then delivered the brutal truth she already knew deep in her gut. You're going to need someone who specializes specifically in family law and custody battles, Haley. This really isn't my area of expertise at all. I'm truly sorry, but you need a specialist for something this serious. By noon, Haley had frantically contacted 5 different highly recommended family law attorneys and been professionally rejected by 4 of them. They saw Josh Brooke's name at the top of the legal documents, recognized the wealthy millionaire businessman with significant resources, understood the extensive resources he could bring to bear in a prolonged legal fight that could easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, calculated their chances of winning against someone with unlimited money for endless appeals, and politely declined to take on a case they couldn't guarantee winning convincingly. The 5th attorney was different in every way. Patricia Nguyen had a formidable reputation for being absolutely ruthless in custody disputes, for defending mothers against fathers who suddenly discovered convenient paternal instinct after years of calculated absence. Her office was sharp and expensive-looking. Her handshake was firm and confident. Her assessing eyes studied Haley with the cool, professional efficiency of someone who'd seen every possible variation of this tragic story. "Tell me absolutely everything," Patricia said without preamble, pulling out a legal pad. "Don't leave out any details, even ones that seem embarrassing or unflattering. I need complete honesty to build the strongest possible defense. And understand this will be expensive. We're looking at a minimum of $200,000 to fight this properly, possibly more if it goes to trial. Can you afford that?" Haley thought of her $15 million empire, built from nothing but determination, and her grandmother's trust fund. "Yes, I can afford whatever it takes to protect my children." "Good, because Josh Brooke can afford more. This is going to be a war of attrition, and he'll try to bleed you dry financially and emotionally." And Haley did. She told Patricia everything about loving Josh completely and unconditionally, about supporting him financially and emotionally through devastating business failures, about standing loyally beside him when other investors and friends walked away and abandoned him. She told her about carefully planning to reveal the pregnancy as a wonderful surprise, about Josh's cold confession of loving someone else, about leaving quietly rather than trapping him with obligation and resentment. She told her about building this new life from absolute nothing, about raising 3 demanding children completely alone, about creating financial stability and emotional security without him. Patricia listened without interrupting even once, taking careful, detailed notes on her legal pad with precise handwriting. When Haley finally finished her story, Patricia leaned back in her expensive leather chair and delivered her professional assessment with devastating honesty. His legal position is significantly stronger than you probably want to admit or acknowledge. Biology gives him substantial parental rights regardless of past circumstances or behavior. The fact that you deliberately concealed their existence for 3 years, even with understandable reasons, will be viewed extremely negatively by most judges. His considerable financial resources give him the ability to drag this fight out for years if necessary. Haley felt physically sick, her stomach churning. "So I'm going to lose my children? He's going to take them from me." "I didn't say that at all," Patricia said sharply. "I said his position is strong, but legal strength isn't the same thing as moral rightness. You're going to fight back hard, and we're going to make this battle so ugly and public that he'll wish he'd never walked into that cafe." Legal papers were filed within 1 week with ruthless efficiency. Patricia's comprehensive counter-motion painted Josh in the harshest possible light as an abandoning spouse who'd deliberately driven his pregnant wife from her home, who'd chosen another woman over his family without hesitation, who'd shown absolutely no interest in locating his missing wife after the first 6 superficial months, who now only wanted access to children because he'd accidentally stumbled upon them while pursuing completely unrelated interests. She methodically included extensive financial records showing Josh had never filed a single missing person report, had never attempted any real searches after hiring one private investigator who came back empty-handed, had moved on completely with his life and his new strategic marriage without ever looking back or wondering about his first wife's fate. The meticulously documented evidence was utterly damning and mostly completely true. But Haley knew with sinking certainty it wouldn't be nearly enough. Josh could counter every single argument with his own narrative of pain and betrayal, his own claim of being the victim denied knowledge of his children. Josh didn't passively wait for court dates to arrive. He moved to town immediately, rented an expensive house just 3 blocks from Haley's cottage, deliberately stationed himself in strategic places where he might catch glimpses of the children going about their daily lives. Haley spotted him sitting in his car outside the preschool one afternoon, just watching the playground with an intensity that made her blood run cold. She immediately called the police, filed an emergency restraining order request that was frustratingly denied because technically Josh hadn't actually done anything legally threatening. Yet the small town turned dramatically cold toward Josh almost immediately after word spread. People talked in small communities, and everyone who'd heard Haley's story, who'd watched her build herself from nothing, who genuinely loved those sweet triplets, made their strong disapproval abundantly clear. Shop owners flatly refused him service. Restaurant hostesses claimed they were completely fully booked. People crossed streets deliberately to avoid him. But Josh proved remarkably persistent despite the social hostility. He started showing up at town council meetings where Haley served on several committees. He attended bookstore author events, always sitting silently in the back row, never speaking but always conspicuously present. He volunteered at the community center, trying desperately to become part of the social fabric that had so completely embraced Haley. The legal war escalated with frightening speed. Josh filed aggressive motions demanding Haley's complete financial records, claiming she'd illegally used her status as his legal wife to build her current empire, and therefore owed him substantial compensation. Patricia countered fiercely with her own demands for Josh's complete records, publicly revealing that his affair with Veronica had started a full 8 months before he told Haley he loved someone else, proving conclusively that the marriage had been destroyed by his ongoing betrayal long before Haley finally left. Josh aggressively subpoenaed all medical records from the triplets' birth, trying to establish legal proof that Haley had deliberately concealed the pregnancy with malicious intent. Patricia fought this viciously tooth and nail, arguing medical, privacy and patient rights, but a sympathetic judge eventually granted partial access despite her objections. The records showed clearly that Haley had been 7 months pregnant when arriving in town, that she'd gone through labor and delivery completely alone with only medical staff present, that she'd deliberately listed no father whatsoever on any birth certificates. Josh then demanded extensive psychological evaluations of Haley to determine her fitness as a parent and guardian. Patricia absolutely exploded at this development, filed formal complaints about harassment and intimidation, threatened to make this entire case so public that Josh's already damaged reputation would never recover from the scandal. But the judge, an older conservative man who seemed instinctively sympathetic to father's rights, approved a limited evaluation despite all protests. Every single legal move Josh made was technically justified under family law and simultaneously morally devastating. He was cynically using the system exactly as it was designed, fighting aggressively for parental rights that biology granted him regardless of his past behavior or character. And Haley, watching this man she'd once loved with her whole heart, try systematically to tear apart her life through paperwork and legal maneuvers, felt something deep inside her harden into absolute, unshakable determination. She wasn't the broken woman who'd left Josh's penthouse 3 years ago crying and devastated. She was someone who'd built an empire from grief and determination, who'd raised 3 remarkable children to be kind and strong and confident. And she would burn her entire world to the ground before she'd let Josh Brooke hurt them the way he'd hurt her. Patricia worked brutal 18-hour days building Haley's comprehensive defense. She personally interviewed everyone who'd known Haley during the pregnancy and after the difficult birth. She compiled extensive evidence of Haley's exceptional character, her unwavering dedication to the children, the stable, loving home environment she'd created from nothing. She tracked down and deposed former employees of Josh's company who testified about his obsessive focus on status and image over human relationships. She even located Veronica, who proved surprisingly eager to provide a detailed deposition about Josh's character in exchange for immunity from certain uncomfortable questions about her own behavior during the marriage. Veronica described in devastating detail a man desperately trying to belong, pathetically easy to manipulate, so obsessively focused on climbing social ladders that he'd married a complete stranger, primarily for family connections, and ignored every red flag until it was far too late. The complicated case became regional news almost overnight. Reporters started showing up, asking pointed questions about the millionaire businessman who'd apparently abandoned his pregnant wife and was now fighting aggressively for custody of children he'd never known existed. Josh's face began appearing in newspapers under sensational headlines that made him look absolutely monstrous and unsympathetic. And through absolutely all of it, Haley somehow protected her children from the vicious war being waged over their very existence. She maintained their comforting routines, kept their lives as stable as possible, told them nothing whatsoever about the legal battles. But Aurelia started having terrible nightmares about shadow men taking them away. Dashiell began asking why Mommy cried quietly in the bathroom. Isolde gradually stopped singing as much, her natural joy noticeably dimmed by tension she could feel but not understand. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks from the initial filing, and both experienced attorneys predicted a brutal trial that could potentially last many months. Josh and Haley would sit in the same courtroom, forced to face each other directly, forced to litigate their painful past and their children's uncertain future in front of strangers who would ultimately decide what happened to 3 innocent lives. Chapter 6. The Testimony. The courtroom felt like a cage specifically designed to trap people in their absolute worst moments and force them to relive their most painful failures. Harsh fluorescent lights made absolutely everyone look sick and exhausted. Wooden benches worn smooth by decades of other people's tragedies and broken families. Walls painted that soul-crushing institutional beige that seemed deliberately designed to drain all hope from everyone present. Haley sat rigidly beside Patricia at the defendant's table, with her back held straight through sheer force of will, hands folded tightly together to keep them from shaking, face carefully maintained as neutral as possible despite the terror coursing through her entire body. Across the wide aisle, Josh sat with his expensive attorney Richard, and Haley could feel his intense eyes constantly on her, though she absolutely refused to look in his direction or acknowledge his presence in any way. Judge Sarah Rodriguez entered with commanding presence, a woman in her early 60s with steel-grey hair pulled back severely from her face and an expression suggesting she'd heard every possible lie and excuse humans could devise over her long distinguished career. She took her elevated seat with practiced efficiency, arranged paperwork with precise, deliberate movements, and surveyed both parties with penetrating eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing. This is a preliminary hearing to determine paternity and discuss temporary custody arrangements, she began in a voice that carried clear authority throughout the silent courtroom. I've read both petitions carefully and all supporting documentation. This is clearly an unusual case with extremely complicated circumstances. We're here today to establish basic facts, nothing more at this stage. Patricia stood first with confident posture. Your Honor, my client, Haley Matthews, is the sole parent of 3 happy, healthy, well-adjusted children who are thriving under her exceptional care. The petitioner, Joshua Brooke, is essentially a biological stranger who cruelly abandoned his pregnant wife and now seeks to disrupt stable lives because he accidentally discovered children he never knew existed. Richard stood immediately in response. Your Honor, my client was never informed of his children's existence by anyone. Ms. Matthews made a completely unilateral decision to deliberately deny Mr. Brooke his fundamental paternal rights, to raise his biological children without his knowledge or consent, to deprive him of 3 irreplaceable years of their lives. Regardless of any past marital difficulties, Mr. Brooke has every legal and moral right to know his children. Judge Rodriguez looked between the 2 attorneys with an expression of weary patience. I don't care about your marriage or how it ended. I care exclusively about 3 children who didn't ask to be born into this mess. Everything we do in this courtroom is about their welfare, not your feelings or your rights. The hearing formally began with Patricia's carefully prepared case. She called Rosalind as her first witness, and the elderly woman walked to the witness stand with natural dignity and grace. Tell the court how you first met Ms. Matthews, Patricia instructed. She appeared at my door 3 years ago, 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go. She had 1 suitcase containing everything she owned, and eyes that looked like someone had torn her heart completely out of her chest. I rented her the cottage because I could tell immediately she needed safety more than anything else in the world. Did she ever mention the father of her children? Never by name, not once. She only said her marriage had ended, that she needed to start fresh somewhere the past couldn't find her. She wasn't running from anything criminal or dangerous. She was running from heartbreak. Richard cross-examined with sharp, aggressive questions. Did Ms. Matthews ever indicate to you that she'd informed the father about the pregnancy? No, sir, she did not. Did she express any intention whatsoever of informing him? No, sir. And I didn't encourage her to contact him either. When a woman shows up that broken and vulnerable, you don't push her to contact the person who broke her so badly. Patricia called several more carefully selected witnesses. The dedicated doctor who delivered the triplets testified about Haley going through extremely difficult labor without any support system, about her obvious devotion to the children's health and welfare, about 3 years of regular checkups that showed excellent, consistent parenting. The preschool director described Aurelia, Dashiell, and Isolde as exceptionally well-adjusted, confident children who showed absolutely no signs of neglect or trauma. The bookstore manager testified about Haley building a highly successful venture while simultaneously raising demanding triplets, about her dedication to both her children and her community. Each carefully chosen witness systematically painted a picture of a woman who'd taken complete devastation and transformed it into purpose, who'd raised 3 children to be loved and secure despite doing it entirely alone. Then Patricia did something unexpected that made Josh visibly pale. She called Josh himself to the stand as a hostile witness. Josh walked slowly to the witness stand looking like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd obviously lost, the dark shadows under his eyes, the way his hand shook slightly as he was formally sworn in. Patricia approached him with controlled professional aggression. "Mr. Brooke, when exactly did you tell your wife you loved someone else?" Josh's voice was quiet and strained. 3 years ago, March. Be more specific with the date. What month exactly? And March. And when were the triplets born? And May, 2 months later. So Ms. Matthews was 7 months pregnant when you told her you loved someone else. Did you know she was pregnant at that time? No, I did not. Did you ask if there was any reason she might be particularly upset beyond the obvious betrayal of your marriage vows? No. Did you wonder at all why she left so suddenly, so completely, without any explanation? I thought she was hurt and needed space to process everything. How much space did you give her? How long did you actively search for your missing wife? I hired a private investigator for 6 months. When he couldn't find any trace of her, I assumed she wanted to stay disappeared and respect her wishes. And then you married someone else. Just 3 months after your wife vanished. Tell the court about Veronica Ashford. Richard objected immediately and strenuously. Relevance, Your Honor. Mr. Brooks' subsequent marriage has absolutely no bearing on his parental rights. It demonstrates his priorities and character, Patricia countered smoothly, which directly impacts his fitness as a parent and guardian. Judge Rodriguez considered for a moment. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Brooke. Josh looked absolutely miserable. I married Veronica primarily for her family connections. Her family had resources and social connections that could help my struggling company. It was strategic. Strategic, Patricia repeated with obvious distaste. You mean you deliberately used her? We used each other. She wanted access to my money. I wanted her family connections. It was a transaction that both parties understood and agreed to. Until she took you for $7 million in the divorce settlement. Tell me, Mr. Brooke, do you have a consistent pattern of treating people as transactions, of calculating their value based primarily on what they can provide you? Richard objected again, but the damage was clearly done. The courtroom had witnessed Josh openly admit to marrying for pure strategy, to treating important relationships as business transactions. Patricia pressed her advantage harder. If you had known Ms. Matthews was pregnant when she left, what would you have done differently? Josh opened his mouth, then closed it. The hesitation was absolutely damning. Let me rephrase that question more clearly, Patricia said coldly. Would you have stayed with your pregnant wife, or would you have still married Veronica Ashford for her valuable family connections? I don't know, Josh admitted, and the words fell like stones. I was a different person then. I made terrible choices. Then Patricia revealed the phone records, showing Josh had been in contact with Veronica for 8 full months before he told Haley he loved someone else. concrete evidence of an ongoing affair. So Mr. Brooke wasn't just choosing strategy over love. He was actively having an affair while married to Ms. Matthews, while she was pregnant with his children. This man cheated, lied, and abandoned his pregnant wife, and now wants this court to reward that unconscionable behavior. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Rodriguez's expression hardened noticeably. Then it was Haley's turn to testify, and she felt like she was walking to her own execution. "Tell the court about your marriage. I loved him completely. When his company almost failed, I worked 2 jobs while he rebuilt. I thought we were true partners. When did you learn you were pregnant?" "A week before he told me he loved someone else. I was waiting to tell him. I was so excited. What happened instead? He came home and told me he loved Veronica, that she understood his world better, that our marriage was over because I wasn't strategic enough." "Did you tell him about the pregnancy?" "No," Haley's voice cracked. "I realized that if I told him, he might stay out of obligation. I didn't want to be an obligation." Richard's cross-examination was brutal, but Haley held steady through it all. Judge Rodriguez looked exhausted. "I'm ordering DNA testing, but we all know what results will show. You're both going to mandatory mediation." Chapter 7. The Mediation from Hell. The mediation office felt deliberately neutral, with its beige walls and comfortable chairs, specifically designed to not trigger anyone while people discussed tearing apart lives with maximum civility. Dr. Helen Frost radiated pure competence and zero tolerance for nonsense. Short grey hair, sharp, intelligent eyes behind practical glasses, an expression suggesting she'd heard every manipulation and excuse humans could possibly devise. "Let me be absolutely clear," Dr. Frost began without preamble. "I'm not here to decide who's right or wrong about the past. I'm here to determine if you can co-parent these children without destroying them psychologically. Everything else is irrelevant." She looked at Haley first. "You've raised 3 children successfully for 3 years. That's genuinely commendable. But children eventually ask complicated questions about their origins. Denying them access to that information could be more harmful long-term than allowing carefully supervised contact." Then she looked at Josh. "You abandoned your pregnant wife, regardless of whether you knew about the pregnancy. You chose strategy over authentic love, and now want access to children you contributed absolutely nothing toward raising." Both shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want for these children?" Haley answered immediately. "Safety, stability, to grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally." Dr. Frost wrote this down. "And you?" Josh's answer came slower. "I want to know them, to be part of their lives in whatever capacity Haley allows." "Why don't you deserve it?" "Because I threw away their mother without thought. Because I destroyed a marriage for connections. Because I only care about them now that I know they exist." Dr. Frost pulled out a tablet. "These are videos from the children's preschool. The video showed the triplets. None mentioned a father. None showed awareness that something was missing. These children have constructed a complete world without you, Mr. Brooke." She paused on Isolde, laughing. "What can you give these children?" Josh stared at the frozen image. "Nothing. They have everything they need." "You owe them nothing," Haley said, speaking to Josh for the first time. Dr. Frost pulled out more evidence. "Mr. Brooke has been photographing the children from a distance." Josh's face went red. "I just wanted to see them." "But you did scare someone," Dr. Frost said, looking at Haley. "Here's what I'm proposing," Dr. Frost said. "Complete separation for now. Mr. Brooke returns to the city. No contact for 6 months. During that time, intensive therapy for both. Both started to protest. After 6 months, we reconvene. If Mr. Brooke has demonstrated genuine growth, we discuss supervised visitation entirely at Ms. Matthews' discretion." 6 months? Josh's voice was anguished. 6 months is nothing compared to the years you've already missed. When they reconvened, both parties reluctantly agreed. Judge Rodriguez approved the plan with the addendum that Josh was to have absolutely no contact during separation. Josh left town that evening. Haley watched him drive away. "Everything's going back to normal," Haley promised her children, though she knew that was a lie. Chapter 8. The Long Silence. 18 months passed in silence that felt both liberating and suffocating simultaneously, like breathing underwater, like learning to exist in a completely different element. Haley rebuilt her sense of safety slowly and painfully, like someone learning to walk again after a devastating injury that required extensive, painful rehabilitation. Dr. Frost connected Haley with a therapist named Christine, who specialized specifically in betrayal trauma and abandonment issues. Twice weekly, Haley sat in Christine's comfortable office and talked about loving someone who'd thrown her away completely, about building walls so impossibly high that nothing could ever hurt her again, about whether protecting her children from their father was genuine wisdom or just transferring her own unresolved hurt onto innocent people. "You're not wrong for what you did," Christine said during one particularly difficult session when Haley was struggling with guilt. "Leaving Josh was survival. Building a life without him was triumph. But consider carefully whether you're still running from something that genuinely can't chase you anymore." The children thrived magnificently in the absence of constant tension that had permeated everything during the legal battles. Aurelia stopped having nightmares about shadow men coming to take them away from their mother. Dashiell's gentle curiosity expanded to include questions about everything from quantum physics to why people fall in love and get hurt. Isolde sang constantly again, her natural joy bubbling over into every moment, filling their cottage with music. Haley started dating Garrett seriously around month 8 of the separation. He was the town's respected fire chief, a widower with a teenage daughter named Ruby, who handled the complicated situation with remarkable grace and maturity. Garrett was everything Josh hadn't been: steady, present, secure in himself, without needing external validation or status symbols. He loved Haley not for what she could provide or how she made him look, but simply for who she was as a complete person. The first time Garrett stayed overnight at the cottage, Haley felt overwhelming guilt that surprised her with its intensity. Not because she still loved Josh in any romantic way, but because moving forward with her life felt like closing a door that should maybe stay open for the children's sake. Like she was making decisions that would affect them without their input. "You're allowed to be happy," Garrett said gently when she confessed this complicated fear late at night. "Josh Brooke threw away his chance at this life 3 years ago. That doesn't mean you have to remain alone forever as some kind of penance for his mistakes and your survival choices." Garrett built the children an elaborate treehouse in the backyard, taught them to identify constellations on clear nights, turning astronomy into adventure, read them stories with different character voices that made them giggle. The triplets adored him completely, and Haley watched them bloom under the attention of a man who showed up consistently without conditions or calculations. Meanwhile, Dr. Frost sent periodic detailed updates about Josh's progress in therapy, information she was authorized to share. He'd relocated to a smaller town, 2 hours from the city, started working intensively with a therapist who specialized in narcissistic behavior patterns and emotional development, attended group sessions for divorced fathers trying desperately to rebuild relationships with children they'd lost. The professional reports suggested genuine, sustained work rather than performative compliance. But Haley remained deeply skeptical about whether people could truly change their fundamental nature. Around month 10, Haley received an unexpected email from Dr. Frost with Josh's explicit written permission to share its contents. It was a letter he'd written to the children that he'd never sent, part of his therapeutic process of learning to express emotions honestly. Haley almost deleted it without reading, her finger hovering over the delete button. She didn't want Josh's words in her head, didn't want to feel anything about his journey toward becoming better when he'd caused so much damage. But something made her open the attachment instead. The letter didn't apologize for not being in their lives or make elaborate excuses for his absence. Instead, Josh wrote about learning what it genuinely means to be a good person, about understanding that being a father is a privilege earned through character and consistency, rather than claimed through biology and legal rights, about hoping desperately that someday he might become someone they could be proud to know rather than ashamed to acknowledge. He wrote about their mother with genuine reverence that Haley had never heard from him, describing her strength and grace and capacity for forgiveness in ways that were accurate rather than conveniently flattering. The letter was humble, self-aware, and completely devoid of any demands or expectations. Haley cried reading it, not because she wanted Josh back in any capacity, but because the transformation suggested something she hadn't seriously considered. That people could actually change fundamentally if they were willing to completely burn down who they were and rebuild from brutal honesty rather than comfortable delusion. She responded through Dr. Frost with carefully chosen words. "Tell Josh I read the letter. Tell him I'm glad he's working on himself. Tell him the children are thriving and don't need disruption right now. Tell him maybe in a few years, when they're older and can understand complexity, we can revisit this conversation. And tell him I'm seeing someone good, someone who treats me well, and he needs to understand that chapter of our lives is permanently closed." Dr. Frost passed the message faithfully. Josh responded simply that he understood completely, that he'd continue his personal work without expectation of reward or reconciliation, that Haley's happiness mattered more than his redemption. The silence resumed between them, but it felt different now, less like fortress walls and more like healthy space, allowing everyone to heal properly. Then Garrett proposed on Christmas Eve in a moment that felt perfect. The children were decorating sugar cookies with elaborate frosting designs when he got down on one knee with a ring that sparkled under the kitchen lights. Ruby stood beside him grinning, clearly complicit in the romantic plan. "I love your mother," Garrett said to the children first, not to Haley, respecting that they needed to be part of this decision. "And I love you 3 more than I knew it was possible to love someone else's children. I want us to be a real family officially. If that's something you'd want too." Aurelia, always their fierce spokesperson, asked the most important question with typical directness. "Would you be our dad? Like really our dad?" Garrett's eyes got wet with emotion. "I'd be honored to be your dad. You'd have to share me with Ruby, but I promise there's enough of me to go around for everyone." The children conferred in whispered voices, their heads together conspiratorially, then nodded in unison. Aurelia delivered their official verdict with the gravity of a judge. "We think you should definitely marry Mommy. She smiles way more when you're here." Only then did Garrett turn to Haley with the question, "So what do you think?" Haley said yes, with tears streaming down her face, and the children cheered like they'd won something important. The ring slid onto her finger, and Haley looked at this man who'd loved her without needing to destroy her first, who'd chosen her without calculations or strategic thinking, who made her believe in genuine partnership again. The wedding was planned for summer, 6 months away. A simple beach ceremony with their blended family, nothing elaborate or performative. 2 weeks before the wedding, Dashiell came home from school with a family tree project that required filling in relatives. He stared at the paper with visible confusion that broke Haley's heart. "I don't know what to put for father," he said quietly, his gentle voice troubled. "Garrett is going to be our dad after the wedding, but we had a father before that, right? The one who died?" Haley had told them their father was gone, letting them assume death because it was easier than explaining abandonment and betrayal to toddlers who wouldn't understand complexity. But 6-year-olds asked harder questions and deserved more honest answers. She sat down with all 3 children that evening and told them an age-appropriate version of difficult truth. Their father was alive, He and Haley had separated before they were born because they weren't right for each other. He didn't know they existed for a long time, and when he found out, everyone agreed it was best for the children to stay with Haley where they were safe and happy and loved. But someday, when they were older and could understand complicated adult situations, they could meet him if they wanted to. Aurelia processed this information with her characteristic intensity. Is he a bad person? He made bad choices, Haley said carefully, choosing her words with tremendous care. But he's trying to become better. People are complicated. Sometimes they hurt others without meaning to, and sometimes they work very hard to fix themselves afterward. The conversation opened something in the children that Haley hadn't anticipated. They started asking questions constantly, wanted to know what their father looked like, if they got their dark eyes from him, why he made bad choices, whether he ever thought about them. One evening after the children were finally asleep, Haley sat on the porch with Garrett and confessed her growing concern about the situation. They're asking about Josh constantly now. I don't want his shadow hanging over our wedding, over our life together. But I also can't keep lying to them about their origins. Garrett held her hand and said something that showed exactly why she loved him. I'm not afraid of Josh being their biological father. I'm not threatened by supervised visits or by him being part of their lives in whatever limited capacity makes sense. What I care about is whether you can handle being in any proximity to him without it destroying the peace you've worked so hard to build. I think I can, Haley said slowly, testing the words. Because I'm not the woman who fell apart when he left anymore. I'm someone who rebuilt herself completely, and his presence isn't a threat to me anymore. It's just a complication we'll navigate together. 2 weeks later, Haley married Garrett on the beach with her children and his daughter standing beside them as the blended family they were becoming, with the supportive community she'd built surrounding them with love, with genuine affection that felt real and earned and safe. Josh wasn't there, respected her boundary completely, and Haley danced at her wedding without his shadow darkening anything. But 3 weeks after the honeymoon, she kept her promise and contacted Dr. Frost about introducing Josh to his children. What happened in that supervised meeting would determine whether redemption was actually real or just another elaborate performance. Chapter 9. The Meeting. Haley arrived at Dr. Frost's office 15 minutes early and spent those minutes breathing like she'd forgotten how, trying desperately to prepare herself for seeing Josh after 18 long months of complete silence. When Josh walked through the door, Haley barely recognized the man standing before her. The expensive confidence that had defined him was completely gone, replaced with something quieter and more genuine that seemed to come from deep inside rather than external validation. He'd lost considerable weight, dressed simply in plain jeans and an ordinary button-down shirt that didn't scream wealth or status. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The constant calculation and ambition had been replaced with something that looked remarkably like hard-earned humility. They sat in chairs positioned at careful angles by Dr. Frost, close enough to have genuine conversation, but far enough to maintain safe, emotional distance. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Dr. Frost gestured for them to begin. Josh spoke first, his voice different from the man who told her he loved someone else. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know you don't owe me anything. Haley's response was deliberately cool and distant. I'm not here for you. The children are asking difficult questions about their father, and I need to know if you're someone safe for them to eventually know. I understand completely. Josh's hands were clasped tightly. Dr. Frost told me you're getting married. Congratulations. I genuinely hope he's everything I wasn't. He is. Haley touched her engagement ring deliberately. Garrett loves me without needing to lose me first. He sees value in people immediately, not after destroying them, teaches him what he threw away. The words landed like intended blows, and Josh absorbed them without flinching or defending himself. "You deserve that. You always deserved that. I was just too broken to see it." "Broken doesn't excuse cruelty," Haley said sharply. "You told me you loved someone else while I was pregnant with your children. You married a gold digger for business connections. You launched a legal war against me when you accidentally discovered the children existed. That's not broken. That's calculated harm." "You're right," Josh said simply. "No defensiveness, no elaborate excuses. I was cruel, calculatingly cruel. I treated you like a transaction that stopped being profitable, and I treated our children like assets to claim once I knew they existed. Everything you're saying is completely accurate, and there's no apology big enough for that." Haley had prepared herself for defensiveness, for justifications, for the Josh who could never admit fault or take responsibility. This version, who agreed with her harshest assessment, was disarming in ways that made her furious. "So you did therapy and learned to agree with people. That doesn't prove you've changed. It just proves you've learned better manipulation strategies." "That's fair," Josh acknowledged. "You have absolutely no reason to believe anything I say." He looked directly at her for the first time. 18 months ago, I was a man who thought people were resources to be used, who calculated value based on utility, who destroyed the best thing in my life because she wasn't impressive enough for my ambitions. Dr. Frost helped me see that I was fundamentally broken in ways that made me dangerous to everyone around me. And now you're fixed. No, I'll never be fixed. But I'm better. I understand that being a good person is daily work, not a destination you reach. I understand that relationships are about showing up consistently, not performing when it benefits you. I understand that our children are extraordinary because of everything you did for them, not despite my absence. Haley wanted to hate him for saying all the right things. "The children think their father is dead. I let them believe that because it was easier than explaining why you didn't want them." Josh flinched visibly. "I did want them. I just didn't know they existed." "You didn't want them," Haley corrected coldly. "You wanted me gone because I wasn't strategic enough for your plans. If I'd told you about the pregnancy, what would you have done?" The question hung between them like a blade. Josh opened his mouth, closed it, and the hesitation was absolutely telling. "Exactly," Haley said. "You would have seen them as complications that interfered with your strategic marriage. So I protected them from a father who would have resented their existence." "You were right to protect them," Josh said quietly. "The man I was shouldn't have been anywhere near children. I would have damaged them the way I damaged you. So why should I let you near them now? What's different except that you took some therapy classes and learned to parrot accountability?" Josh didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "Nothing's different in ways I can prove. Change only shows up in sustained action over years, not in one conversation. But I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm doing the work. Not because I expect forgiveness or reward, but because those children deserve to know their biological father tried to become worthy of them. Even if he never succeeds, they have a father," Haley said firmly. "Garrett is going to be their dad in every way that matters. He shows up for them daily, loves them without conditions, never makes them feel like they have to earn his attention. You're biological fact, not family." "I know that," Josh said, his acceptance complete. "I'm not here to compete with Garrett or disrupt the family you've built. I'm here because someday Aurelia, Dashiell, and Isolde are going to ask why their biological father wasn't present. And I need them to have the chance to judge that for themselves when they're old enough." Haley felt tears threaten and refused to let them fall. "You don't get to absolve your guilt through my children. Your redemption isn't their responsibility." "It's not about my redemption," Josh said. "It's about giving them choices I took away. You were right to hide them from me. You were right to build a life without me. You were right about everything. But they're growing up, and they have questions I'm the only one who can answer truthfully." "What truth?" Haley demanded. "That their father thought status mattered more than love? That he threw away their mother because she wasn't impressive enough for his social climbing? That's the truth they'll get from me. That's part of the truth, Josh acknowledged. The other part is that their father realized too late that he'd destroyed something irreplaceable. That he spent 18 months learning to be someone better. That he respects their mother more than anyone because she had the strength to walk away from someone who didn't deserve her. The words were everything Haley needed to hear, and nothing that changed the past or healed the wounds. Dr. Frost, who'd been silent, finally spoke. Haley, what are you afraid of? The question bypassed all her defenses. I'm afraid letting Josh in will destroy what we've built. That the children will prefer him because he's novelty and Garrett is every day. That Josh will hurt them the way he hurt me. That I'll lose control of protecting them from people who might damage them. Those are reasonable fears, Dr. Frost acknowledged. Josh, what are you afraid of? That I'll never be good enough, Josh said honestly. That 18 months of work isn't sufficient to repair the damage I caused. That I don't deserve mercy, but I'm desperately hoping for it anyway. That I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I threw away my family because I was too shallow to see value without price tags attached to it. The honesty between them was uncomfortable and necessary. Haley sat with it, let it sink into her bones, and made a decision that terrified her. I'll introduce you to them after the wedding, under strict supervision. Not as their father, but as someone their mother used to know, who's trying to be better. They can decide over time if they want you in their lives. But there are conditions you'll follow absolutely, or this ends permanently. Josh nodded immediately. Anything? You don't undermine Garrett's role, ever. He's their dad in every way that matters. You don't make demands or create expectations. You don't disrupt their stability. You get supervised visits when I allow them. Not on your schedule. You have zero legal rights, zero parental authority, zero claim to their time or attention. If you revert to who you were, if you bring drama or manipulation or try to turn them against me, I disappear again and you'll never find us. Do you understand? I agree completely, Josh said without hesitation. And one more thing, Haley added, her voice dropping to something colder. This meeting doesn't mean I forgive you. It doesn't mean we're healed. It means I'm prioritizing my children's eventual questions over my own hurt. But I will never forget what you did, and I will never trust you fully. You destroyed that permanently. Josh absorbed this final condition. I understand. What I did is unforgivable. The fact that you're giving me any chance at all is mercy I don't deserve. As the meeting ended, Josh stood to leave and paused at the door. Garrett is a lucky man, and your children are lucky to have you. Thank you for being strong enough to protect them from me until I could become someone safe to be around. Haley watched him leave, then sat in the office for another 30 minutes processing everything that had happened. She called Garrett and told him everything about the meeting. I'm not afraid of Josh, Garrett said immediately. I'm not threatened by supervised visits or by him being their biological father. What I care about is whether you can handle being near him without it destroying your peace. I think I can, Haley said slowly, testing the truth of her words. Because I'm not the woman who fell apart when he left. I'm someone who rebuilt herself completely, and his presence isn't a threat anymore. It's just another complication we'll handle together. 2 weeks later, Haley married Garrett on the beach with love that felt real and earned. Josh wasn't there, respected her boundary completely. But 3 weeks after the honeymoon, she kept her promise and introduced Josh to his children. What happened in that room would determine everything. Chapter 10. The Redemption. The playroom Dr. Frost had carefully prepared felt deliberately neutral, filled with age-appropriate toys and books and soft lighting designed to make difficult conversations easier for everyone involved. Josh arrived first, sitting stiffly in a chair that felt too small for adult bodies. His hands clasped so tightly together that his knuckles showed white with tension. When Haley walked in with the triplets, the air in the room changed completely. The children clustered around their mother instinctively, 3 pairs of dark eyes studying the stranger who'd made their mother tense. Dr. Frost handled introductions with practiced gentleness. Aurelia, Dashiell, Isolde, this is Josh. He's someone your mother knew a long time ago, and he'd like to talk with you if you're comfortable with that. Aurelia stepped forward first, always their protector. Are you our father? The one who made bad choices? Josh looked stricken by the directness, but didn't flinch from honesty. Yes, I'm your biological father. I made very bad choices that hurt your mother, and because of those choices, I haven't been part of your lives. Why not? Aurelia demanded. Because I didn't know you existed when you were born. Your mother left without telling me she was pregnant, and she was right to do that because I wasn't a good person then. Aurelia considered this. Are you going to hurt Mommy again? No, your mother is married to Garrett now, and Garrett is who she chose. I respect that. I'm not here to change anything about your lives. Dashiell approached next, gentler. Do you like stars? The question shifted everything. Josh's expression softened. I'm learning to appreciate them. I never paid attention to beautiful things before, but I'm trying to now. Garrett taught me constellations. Dashiell's enthusiasm overcame his caution. Do you know about planets? They talked for 10 minutes about Saturn and Mars. Isolde pulled out crayons. Do you want to color? Josh sat cross-legged beside her, and they colored in companionable silence. The hour passed without drama. When time ended, Josh thanked them. Isolde hugged him spontaneously. As they prepared to leave, Aurelia turned back. Garrett is our dad because he's here every day, but maybe you can be our friend who teaches us about mistakes and fixing them. Visits continued monthly, always supervised. Josh never pushed, simply showed up consistently. 6 months passed. Dashiell asked if Josh could attend his science fair. Garrett encouraged her to say yes. Josh attended, stayed respectfully in the background. One evening, nearly 18 months after that first meeting, Haley and Josh had coffee. Finally, Josh said what he'd been holding. The children are extraordinary. Everything good about them comes from you. Haley looked at him. I'm not going to forgive you, but I'm grateful you became someone worthy of knowing them. Years continued passing. The children grew into remarkable teenagers. On Aurelia's 16th birthday, she asked to speak with Josh alone. You taught me that people can be wrong and still choose to become right, Aurelia said. I don't forgive you for hurting Mom, but I respect that you owned your mistakes. The story ended years later at Dashiell's college graduation. Dashiell's speech thanked everyone, including Josh, for teaching him it's never too late. Josh sat crying, understanding he'd lost everything because he thought status mattered more than love. As the ceremony ended, Haley caught Josh's eye. She didn't smile, just nodded once. Josh drove home alone to a small apartment. He understood that he hadn't lost Haley Matthews. She'd freed herself and built a life where his presence was optional. Some prices are paid in money, others in years of regret. Josh paid the highest price, learning what mattered after losing it forever. But he learned, and that knowledge might be worth something after all.